officers there. So these were, the regular police officers with their guns, etc. And it dawned on me that, this is a pretty routine exercise. In other words, you're documenting what happened after the accident, taking pictures, directing traffic. Um, so one of the questions that I brought up yesterday was, can't we have a different level of police, either a tourist police or traffic police? So not even necessarily an officer with a gun, but just somebody with the appropriate authorities for those kinds of things. So directing traffic, um, um, evaluating after an accident, things like that, so that you could have different tools for different things, right? So let the regular police do the road controls and search vehicles, things where you need to have let's say a, a different level, and the more administrative stuff like guiding traffic and accidents for what they would call a BAV so a different level of law enforcement.
Well, and at the end of the day, um, to me, um, it's it's about doing things that are effective to move the traffic along.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I find that when we put our officers on the road to move things along, it actually does more to slow it down than it does to move things along. And that's a and which then kind of says to me, are we properly skilled at directing traffic? I don't know, but something is not right. I mean, I watch the roundabout at the foot of Colbay Hill on this side, on the Colbay side,
Mm-hmm.
and if they put officers there, everything backs up even worse than usual.
Yeah, I mean the fact is everything is so congested. One little thing. I think this morning, um, for some reason, I saw parents were dropping students off at the sports auditorium there, and I think just people having to look for a parking spot, walk their kids across the road. I
Mm.
think that just backed up everything. So things are just so
It takes
congested that
what takes
one
one
little
little
thing,
thing.
exactly,
One little thing anywhere
anywhere,
has a ripple effect.
absolutely.
Um, Now I have to tell you that last week I think there was that big accident on the causeway,
Yes.
um, and it had a huge ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
on this side of the hill and caused traffic to back up in both directions all the way back past the airport and into Kupakoi, into Mullet Bay, and it had a similar effect on the Union Road side into Marigot, and then even um, it had some impacts on Kobe Hill as well. They were very effective, though, at cleaning that up and getting that orchestrated and getting the road reopened. We did that exceptionally well, and once they did that, things started to ease.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think we need, in my mind, there's something that needs to be done where we perhaps have officers strategically placed, at the hot spots, right, where we know that there are typically issues, the roundabouts, causeway, et cetera, right? But don't have them doing stuff until there's an issue, right? So when something happens, you could jump on it,
React. Yeah.
react, and jump on it quickly, um, but not be out there in the middle of the road, which then you put an officer in the middle of the road, then people slow down because there's a person in the road, and then, you know, and then we just cause that one little thing, that one little bottleneck. So maybe the strategic placement of traffic officers um, at the hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
It could be each of the roundabouts. It could be in Maho. It could be on top of the hill, all at the bottom of the hill on both sides. Um, Probably in and out of on LB Scott Road, in and out of St. Peter's is another one of the big hotspots. So that when something happens, we can jump on it quickly because it will happen. Versus trying to be in the thick of it and move things along, which sometimes has the adverse effect that intended would be my thinking off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
But
I agree. And then again, I'd rather not have regular police officers. I mean, one of the things that came out of the conference last week was the police force is understaffed. They have 138 officers and they need more. So allocating them to do this when you
Is-
could have somebody of a different level handle it, I think that makes total
And
sense.
then, of course, how do we pay for it?
Well, and this is actually something that the
Excuse
Minister
me.
of Justice brought up in the past. If because in Curacao they do have, I think they have this level, and they finance it through the fines they collect. So if you up the fines for traffic violations and you use that money, you can help offset the cost of this with those traffic fines. Right now, I think they're too low. So and they're hard to collect. I think the prosecutor's office has to collect them, and so it's a fairly cumbersome process to collect the money.
Yeah, for sure. I know, but it always has been, and that's part of the problem.
Right, right.
That's part of the problem.
And for example, I also brought up. I don't know if how many people are aware. There used to be a service center by the fish market here by the bridge in Simpson Bay.
Why is this all of a sudden closed?
Yeah, it's been closed for a while. So I told Minister of Tiat that it's not a fair question because she's only deputy prime minister, right? So that actually falls under the prime minister. But I've asked him before, and I haven't gotten clarity. He said I think there was being some work being done inside, but this is months and months, right? So again, we're at the point where there's no simple solution. There's not like one thing we can do that's just going to make everything easier. It's
But
going to have to be
and think about this too. And when you talk about this, the public service center on this side of the hill being unavailable, then everybody on this side of the hill, where a whole bunch of the business stuff happens,
Mhm.
now that they have to go to the civil registry or they have to go to the tax inspector or any of that stuff, now they're leaving Simpson Bay, getting in their
Exactly.
car, driving over the hill, looking for a place to park. Um,
Exactly. So
and
all these little things add up, and even online payments. I mean, a lot of people you have to go to the government building to pay for different permits and things like that. Why can't you just do that? Your census registration. A lot of these things everywhere else in the world they just do it online. Save people
and
a
then
headache.
email it to you.
And
Here
then
you go. You
email.
don't have to go pick it up. Here's the document.
Exactly. Exactly. So so again, we're past the point where one thing's going to fix things.
Mhm.
So you need to do a lot of little things to try and make things better. So, indeed, I brought up about the traffic police or tourism police, about the service center, and as well the whole idea of when is enough enough. Everyone's talking about in the conference last week again that St. Martin's reached a point where the development has outpaced the developments in infrastructure.
Well, certainly our capacity, um, and infrastructure capacity, we've been, well beyond what we can sustain for
Hmm.
quite some time. Whether it's electric, water, roads, sewer, uh, telecommunications, all of that stuff is a problem, right? So we need to figure out how how we we simply, um, you know, deal with the capacity issues. From a pure road perspective, right? If we took and said, okay, all the heavy moving equipment, all of the road work, all of, um, the repairs to the road, all of the, I got to move a big container, right? You do this at night.
Right,
You do it off hours.
right.
Um, and you do your road work off hours, and that does an awful lot. That, you know well, it helps people be smart, right? And if we do some of those things, that will help. um and no offense to any of the big double decker buses or the scooters, all of those, four-wheeler tours, all of that stuff, right? You really have to ask yourself, or at least I ask myself all the time. um, I live in the Caribbean. Why am I spending my time on a four-wheeler driving around in traffic? And I could do that anywhere.
Mm.
Why am I doing that on a Caribbean island? And though that type of tourism, uh, does an awful lot to slow things down on the road.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to the meeting yesterday, I asked Indeed, isn't it time that government think about putting a moratorium on development until infrastructure catches up? Minister answered, "Oh, I'm putting a moratorium on buses and taxis." I'm like, "Okay, but
Well, that's
that
that's probably the one thing that if we had more, if we had actual buses and actual taxis that were not that were part of a public system
right."
that was properly managed and run, that might go a long way to fixing some of our problems.
So indeed, I think the problem with the buses is there is no system. You just give permits and then people can go where they want when they want. There is no public transportation system.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of buses that that you, if you're lucky, you can catch one. So
Well, I mean, there should be a public schedule that says the bus um, leaves Kupakoi, Port of Kupakoi at 8 a.m. It arrives in Phillipsburg at 9 a.m., right? And makes these stops along the way. The bus leaves St. Peter's at 8 a.m., and it makes these stops along the way and goes back to Kupakoi, right? And there's a right if you had a public system like that where it was reliable, scheduled, and you would eliminate a lot of this stuff.
but no one wants to do the less populated routes because they make less money, right? So
Well, this is why it needs to be a public system, right?
exactly. That's why if you leave it this way, everyone always wants to do whatever. Phillipsburg to Maho or something, or Marigot. They don't want to do into Point Blanche where they're or into Oyster Pond area where you might not have that many clients, right? They want to fish where the fish are, so they're all overfishing,
Right.
the one spot.
There needs to be a public set of routes, and there has to be service on all those routes at a scheduled time, and here are the stops that they make
Right.
along the way. It's not rocket science.
No.
It's not rocket science. So
So indeed, one of the things I said, again, the meeting last week was very clear. The public sentiment is it feels like there's just too much, and we need to take a pause. And the minister was saying, look, let's finish the carrying capacity study. But the carrying capacity study could take a year to 2 years, let's say,
do the simple, smart things
to
now.
execute, right? So the problem is by the time you do that, you've already approved all these developments, and even you could see in the minister's response, she said, "Well, we already have this Villa Ven approved. You already have Planet Hollywood approved, and something possibly in Mullet Bay. So even if you quote unquote put the brakes now, you
Yeah.
would still have things that are going to kind of that are already in progress that you can't stop."
You've got three big things already happening.
Exactly.
And
So I think it makes sense to say, put a moratorium on big development until we can catch our breath and figure out what do we need and how do we manage what we have and how do we improve, let the infrastructure catch up to the pace of development.
yeah, we need to be smart in
Mm-hmm.
how we do this. And then there was the whole discussion, at least that we have that we were going to limit cars.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you tell a private citizen, Dr. Soccer, Emil Lee,
Mm-hmm.
who are residents of the island who live here, that you can't buy a car? You can't do that in a free country.
Right. But like some countries, for example, they may limit the total number of license plates. They may say, okay, this is the limit. If you want to buy a new car, an additional car, you need to find a car with a plate, basically buy the plate,
Mhm.
and then, that makes it more expensive and you would limit the number of cars. The problem is it leans towards and favors the wealthy, right? I can afford to buy your, beat up I-10, and I'm going to then buy a Mercedes and change the plate and put it on the Mercedes, right? So it does sort of favor the wealthier in the community. But again, this is why you need a public transportation system.
Right. So you can't. I don't think in a free society, in a democracy, I can't say you can't buy something that you want to buy, regardless of how much money you have,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is inappropriate to do that. It's called communism, right? And so, the real question in my mind is maybe we need to think about the number of vehicles that we have. If you had a robust public transportation system, then you could limit the number of rentals that are on the road, right? And and drive people to use a public transportation system. And you could even go so far as to have a public transportation system between where there was a scheduled route from each of the major resort areas that left, at the key times throughout the day that would take people where they wanted to go
Mm-hmm.
and back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could have key transportation routes, grocery routes, people to go that are here on vacation from the stores, right, from the hotels that would go to the grocery stores, right, at particular times of the day. We bring you at this time, we bring you back at that time, right? Or you could set up delivery, online food delivery, and have things delivered. We did it during COVID. We know that it works.
Right.
That would then take a lot of things, a lot of people off the road, and quite frankly improve both the experience of residents and visitors.
And you talked about it. Maybe you know, and again, the easy things are gone. They're done, right? Maybe you need to look at deliveries at off peak hours, right? Maybe garbage collection shouldn't happen during the day. Only
It
can happen at night.
should happen at night.
And deliveries for restaurants, again, maybe it needs to happen, later in the day, in the evening, and not during the day. I understand that creates different operational issues, but I mean, those are the questions we need to at least ask. One of the things, for example, is the car rentals. This, most of the car rental companies, they want to bring in their vehicles and they use them for what, maybe 4 years,
Right.
and then after that, what
They,
do? They
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 sell 'em.
they sell them. So the more car rentals means the more vehicles that eventually come, into circulation. The car rentals are not expensive, right, compared to, and that's always been one of the good things for tourists. The rentals for cars are relatively cheap. Even you compare it to the states, right? It's much less expensive. So they tend to get cheaper cars because they're trying to fit a budget for what price they can rent them out, and then they enter the market faster. So
I mean, for whatever it's worth, I think that the vast majority of our problem
mhm.
is not necessarily the car rentals and the tourists that are here. I think the real issue is the infrastructure and the quality of the roads, the lack of drainage, the potholes, all of those things, and the lack of alternative routes,
Mhm.
so that you can get from point A to point. There's more than one way to get from point A to point B, and it's stuff we've been talking about for decades.
Mhm.
Let's stop talking and let's start doing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that would solve a lot of where we are. Um, we're coming up on 8:45. Anything real quick that we should cover from
Well,
yesterday?
the other thing I brought up, it was very interesting to find out that the tourist office, their actual marketing budget, right? So they have their budget for the ministry, which covers staff, etc., right? They have controllers that go out, those inspectors, all those salaries, for example, get covered by the ministry's budget. But the actual budget that St. Martin has for marketing is only 4 million guilders, so
That's
about
nothing.
$2.2 million.
That's nothing.
It's very small. From that, they have contracts with the different marketing firms, the U.S., Canada, Europe, right? They pay the subsidies, for example, Heineken, Regatta,
Two million.
Carnival.
$2 million
Right,
goes nowhere.
right, right,
That's a pittance.
right.
It's a pittance. It needs to be 5 times that
Well,
minimum.
and Aruba was, they told me, it was around 48, 50 million guilders a year. I mean,
Right.
that indeed seems to make a lot more sense in terms of actual marketing dollars if you want to promote the island. And so that also lends to why St. Martin might only attract a certain crowd, right? If you're not proactively looking for the kind of people that we want for the island,
Right.
you tend to get people based on competing for price, things like that, which
Right.
is
Which is, not necessarily where we want to be.
it's not exactly right, exactly. And so, if we want to look at limiting growth and development, we have to look at increasing the quality and the spend
Right.
the, of the people who are coming here. So, and
The
you need
sad part.
marketing dollars to
Right.
do
To,
that, to
to do
target the people that
to
you
do that.
want.
Um, I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
I couldn't agree more. And if you go back to when I was a kid, right, which is when you were a kid, if you looked at the crowd that was here then and the crowd that's here now, we were much more St. Bart's
Yeah.
than we are today.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, St. Bart's didn't even really, it was there, but nobody went there, right? Everybody came here because we were that high end tourist experience.
Right. Right.
And Emil, always a pleasure to see you, sir.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We look forward to doing it again next week. Another edition of St.
So
Martin
next week
Insights.
I'm off island.
You're off. Oh, so the week after.
The week after.
Perfect. Another edition of St. Martin Insights. News that matters to you in 2 weeks. We'll be right back, 8:46. Here's everything that's happening tonight.